Welcome back to Viewpoint. I'm James Zogby. On Sunday, Southern Sudan began voting in a referendum on independence that's expected to split Africa's largest nation in two. For an analysis of the situation there, I want to welcome Andrew Natsios. He's professor at Georgetown University and a former U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan. From 2001 to 2006, he served as the administrator of USAID, where he managed reconstruction programs in Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, among other places, and served as special humanitarian coordinator for Sudan under President George W. Bush. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we don't know results yet, but when will we know them?
Well, we know in some states, not all of them, that the 60% has been achieved. So I think it's pretty clear by today that enough people have voted to legitimize the election. The national law says at least 60% of the registered voters must vote one way or the other in order to make the election legitimate. So it's been legitimized in that sense, not officially, but by polling observers. There are about 500 polling observers in the north and the displaced camps around Khartoum and all over the south watching to see what happens. We will not know until January 30th what the unofficial vote is, and then by the 14th, I think it is, of February, they'll officially announce the results.
The election seemed to have gone quite well. I mean, there was violence in a couple of areas up in the northern part of the south, but overall it went well. And in particular, the voting in Khartoum went well, so much so that I was struck by the fact that U.S. officials at a briefing were praising President Bashir for his efforts in making the election run well. Did that mark a change? I mean, there were a couple of instances where they praised Bashir on this issue and also on his traveling to the south. They called it an act of enormous political courage. First of all, talk about how the election went. Let me hear about that part first.
Well, we have the same reports from the 500 observers. We're getting reports in now saying exactly that. There was an incident with some Mesoria Arabs in the disputed area of Abyei. It was kind of expected. I thought there'd be more trouble there than there was. And there was a little incident in Western Equatoria, but not much. It's been very peaceful.
And Abyei did not have an election.
No, because they haven't reached a conclusion on the status.
It's almost like a Kirkuk situation.
Well, it's very much like Kashmir. It's a really very intense area. The Ngok Dinka, the Dinka are the largest tribe in all of Sudan, and the kings are from that area, the paramount chiefs. They were ejected by the Mesoria Arabs in the 1980s under Sadiq al-Mahdi, actually before Bashir took over in the coup. And the Ngok want their land back, and there's been commissions and reports and all sorts of interventions externally, but both sides have not accepted a single compromise. I think there will be after the referendum, but not before.
Okay.
And Salva Kiir, the southern president, gave orders to the Southern Army, the SPLA, to stay out of the polling stations, not to interfere in any way, let people vote the way they wanted to, and it appears that the SPLA is carrying out his orders and leaving everyone.
And then in the north as well, it went well.
Yes, it went very well in the displaced camps around Khartoum. I think a lot of the debate in the United States is driven by advocacy groups that haven't ever been to Sudan, let alone know what's really going on. And they're associating, they've decided Bashir is a bad guy, and he's done some terrible things. His government has massacred Arabs and Southerners, Muslims and Christians, but that doesn't mean that on this particular thing, what he's doing is wrong. We can't put white hats and black hats on people and just keep them there, because things change.
So talk to me about this act of enormous political courage and what the U.S., were they sending a signal, or are they simply saying, you've done well here?
They've sent a signal, but it happens to be true. President Bashir is actually very proud. He's told me privately when I've negotiated with him, he's proud of the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement that ended war between the North and the South. He wants that to be his legacy. He's told other Arab leaders that. He said it publicly so many times. I don't think he's saying that just for rhetorical purposes. He wanted to end the war that has split the country since 1956. This war has been going on for literally since independence, with one short 11-year peace with General Numeri that didn't work out so well. So I actually think that the North has never wanted to abrogate the CPA. What they wanted is they were using the referendum to get a deal on the provisions of the divorce. In other words, if the North-South is going to separate, they're going to sort of dangle the referendum in front of the Southerners, which is what they've done the last 6 months, in order to get a better deal on debt, on the water from the Nile River, on oil revenue sharing, and a bunch of other issues. I understand what they did. It just annoyed the Southerners because they said, why are we negotiating the referendum? We already signed this. You agreed to the referendum when you signed the CPA.
So let me talk about that. The vote and the outcome of the vote is really just the first step in negotiating then what the divorce, what the separation will look like if the vote turns out that way, and everyone expects that most likely will. Let's talk about some of the issues that remain, because they are not just thorny, but they're very substantial.
Yes.
First is the border issue, and Abyei is a key part of that. It is currently in the north, but it is felt to be part of the south. It is an oil-rich region. What's going to happen there? Talk about that part.
There are several issues with Abyei. One is it's floating in oil. And if Abyei were to remain part of the North, it's one of the few oil fields that the North would have, because 75% of the oil is in the South. And so there's a vested interest in the North in seeing to it that that they get that oil, because they're going to lose it with the South seceding. So they have a vested interest that has nothing to do with the area. It has to do with oil revenues. The second is that General Bashir, when he was a commander, as a colonel, he was stationed in that area. And he became very close to the Mezariya Arabs. And there's one sub-clan of the Mezariya Arabs, there's 10 or 20,000 people, who are very emotional about this subject. And they are insisting they will not give up this area. And if there's anything imposed on them, that they're going to go to war. And they've been very aggressive about it. And President Bashir has been reluctant to make a deal because he has this personal bond with them. The third issue is the grazing rights. The Southerners have repeatedly told the Mezariya Arabs, you can come take your cows into the south, not just into Abyei, into the south during the dry season to keep your cattle healthy. And of course the Southerners, the Northerners are saying, well, it's another country, how can we guarantee this? And the Southerners have said, we'll sign an international agreement. These agreements exist in other parts of the world, where we guarantee you grazing rights after we become independent. So these three issues are sort of complicating this whole thing. The tragedy of the oil is, all the oil experts say that the area will run out of oil in 2019. So it would be terrible if a war started between the North and the South over something that's going to be depleted in 8 years anyway.
About 1/3 of Sudan will be severed from the whole. It includes about 10% of the population.
No, it's about 20, depending on, it's 8.5 million people out of 40 million.
Okay.
What's that?
Well,
it's
a
20%.
disproportionately large part of the population lives in the north.
That's correct.
They have nothing to do with this agreement at all. They're watching and as their country is being separated. How is that going to play? Is there going to be a backlash in the north against the government for letting this happen?
Well, the Bashir's courage, which the administration publicly expressed, is a function of the opposition of the Islamists, that is to say the more fundamentalist movements led by Hassan al-Turabi, who is an ally and friend of bin Laden. He's married to, bin Laden's married to Turabi's niece. So they're married, they're very close. He was the one who invited him to Sudan and got a place for him in Afghanistan when he was thrown out by President Bashir. So they're very upset privately with this deal. And the Arab nationalists, and it's not a majority. You know, there's a large progressive democratic movement in Khartoum that people forget. Sudanese, Nile River, very well-educated people. They have PhDs, they've been, and 2 million of them, by the way, have left under Bashir to go to the Gulf states or Europe. There are 13,000 Sudanese doctors in Britain right now. Why did they leave? They left because they're actually very progressive in their worldview. They believe in human rights. They want democracy. And those people on this particular issue would be allies of Bashir. That's not his base of support normally. His base of support were the Islamists. He's alienated them now. And so the courage in him pursuing this is essentially because he's alienating his own base by doing this. And when he went to Juba, he took a trip to Juba 4 days before the vote started, and he offered basically, and some people thought it was rhetoric. I didn't. I thought he was offering a olive leaf to the South, saying, we want a permanent economic alliance between two sovereign states should you decide to leave, and I'll be sad if you leave, but you probably are going to leave. And we want an alliance because, you know, they can't get the oil out of the South right now unless they go through the North. That's where the pipeline is, and the oil goes to Port Sudan. That's where it's shipped. So there has to be a symbiotic economic relationship between the North and the South, or neither of them are going to get any oil.
And if it goes elsewhere, actually, it ends up, I mean, if it were to go south, it would only make the costs greater of getting it to where it needs to.
It'll be 10 years before they get a pipeline from the South somewhere else.
Well, there's one, I did want to talk about oil revenues, but I want to talk about nationality and citizenship. You have hundreds of thousands of Southerners living in the North. You have, by law, about 20% of public employees are Southerner, including those in the military. What happens there? I mean, how do they make this amicable split and have a citizenship and nationality law?
Well, there was a lot of emotion around this issue prior to the vote, and it wasn't very helpful. One, Ali Kardi, the foreign minister, made some very aggressive statements. You will not be able to get medical care. You won't even be able to buy food. You won't get your salary if the South separates. And Bashir publicly completely contradicted his own foreign minister and said, no, you will be protected. You will have rights. I mean, you won't be full citizens because you're, you know, unless you decide to. If you decide to become citizens, that's fine. But Bashir contradicted two of his own ministers who publicly had said the exact opposite. So that's another instance where Bashir was a moderating influence in all this, which, you know, I think when he does the right thing, we need to compliment him, it seems to me. And so one formulation that someone from the African Union proposed is dual citizenship. There are Arabs who are merchants who work in the South, not a lot of them, tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands. And then there are probably 750, 800,000 IDPs, Southerners left in Greater Khartoum, because 1.5 million have already come back to the South over the last 5 years. So that's one way of doing it. One way of doing it would be to say within the next 3 years, next 2 years, next year, you have to choose. Do you want citizenship in the North or do you want citizenship in the South? The best thing for both the North and the South would be some kind of flexibility. Don't give them 6 months, give them a longer period of time, and let the border be not porous, you know, you have to control your own borders, but let people move back and forth. Let's not punish the people of the North and the South because the political leaders can't agree on something.
Let me take some calls here. I've got some holding. The numbers are up on the screen. If we can get some calls in, let me see. Let me read out the numbers to you right now. Overseas 001-202-420-5667. In the U.S. it's 202-420-5730. Let's go to Tennessee for a first call. Caller?
Yes, I have a question about, I heard that there was about 100 churches where they filled up the Christian and they burned them alive. I'd like to know what's the number of Islam that got killed under Bashir and how many Islam got killed under Bashir.
Okay, thank you.
You mean
how many Muslims?
How many Christians and how many Muslims?
Yeah.
Well, there is one study that was the most comprehensive study of deaths in Darfur. Darfur is 100% Muslim. There are no Christians there, except a few international workers who might be Christians. So the study that was done was published in Lancet, the most respected European journal of public health. It's used scientific methods. It was studied deaths from February of 2003 to February of 2010. February of 2010. It was published in early 2010. And it concluded that 298,000 people had died in Darfur from the beginning of the war related to the war. 80% of those were from disease or acute malnutrition caused by people being displaced by the Janjaweed militias burning people's villages down. And then 20%, or about 60,000 people, were actually killed. But the people who died of disease because of the Janjaweed attacks. They wouldn't have died otherwise. 300,000 people is a very large number of people.
Talk about the 100 churches and people putting...
I'm actually not sure. I mean, there are many instances of atrocities being committed against the Southerners. It wasn't just 100 churches. It was a lot more than that. The estimates on the there were two civil wars in southern Sudan. The first one was from late 1955, just before independence, and it lasted until 1972 or 73, when there was a peace agreement signed in General Numeri. About 1.5 million people died. Again, the bulk of those were from disease and starvation caused by mass population displacement. And then 2.5 million died in the second civil war, 4 million people.
One last question before we break. The head of the African Union was in the South during the election, and he was decrying the fact of separation, saying this opens the Pandora's box. You're seeing some of the same coming out of editorials in the Arab countries. This is the beginning, the separation of an Arab country, etc., what will come next. Talk to me about the African concern and the Arab concern. Does this open a Pandora's box, or is this a separate and isolatable situation?
Well, it's isolatable in the sense that the number of people who've been killed in violence is nothing in comparison to any other country in Africa or the Arab world. So it seems to me this has to happen if the people vote for it, just because we can't have this chaos in Sudan. It's affected the entire region for 55 years. It's time to put it, for humanitarian, economic, and political, diplomatic purposes, to put it behind us. Let the people decide if they want to separate. Two, the reason the Arabs and Africans are saying this is there are many countries in Africa and the Arab world that are not fully integrated in terms of people are first Arabs or Africans. For example, Chad, the president of Chad is Zagawa, Kobi Zagawa, one of the tribes in Darfur that's in rebellion against the central government. He's an African, okay? There is also, though, Arab tribes in Chad. And the fear is, and this is not just true in Chad, it's true in Mali, it's true in Niger, and the fear is the same sort of thing could happen in these other countries.
So the lesson in Sudan is not that it'll spread like wildfire, it's that if you don't integrate your citizens and become a true representative republic,
yes,
the danger is that it may happen. It may happen as well.
These countries have not managed that issue very well.
Let me go one last call to Arizona. Quick call, quick answer. Caller? Hello?
Good afternoon, Jim.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. Good afternoon, Professor.
How are you?
Very quick question.
Yes. The question is, I think the whole discussion is missing the core of the topic. The whole thing is Bashir has been worse than Saddam Hussein for ions, and the reason he's in power, I can't hear you. I don't know whether you can hear me.
I'm hearing you, yeah. But I gotta tell you, I'm going to cut you off right there because I get your point, and I'm going to have to let you go because we have another guest coming. Bashir, worse than Saddam?
Well, he's not worse than Saddam, but he's bad. But the problem is most Khartoum governments have done the same thing Bashir did. Sadiq al-Mahdi, who was his predecessor, he overthrew, was democratically elected. He's the great-grandson of the Mahdi, who was the great religious leader in the late 19th century in Sudan. He was democratically elected. He committed terrible atrocities against the Southerners prior to Bashir being in office. A lot of people who are younger don't remember the atrocities that went on in the 1960s in the war between the North and the South. This has been going on since 1956. 4 million people have died. Most of those were not under the Bashir government. They were predated him.
Thank you so much for joining us. When we come back, we're going to look at Gaza 2 years later with Bill Corcoran from ANERA.